start recording here. My name is Jennifer Slattery, and I am the Director of Training for the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns. I would like to welcome you to this information session. And we have a great turnout today. A lot of people excited about this opportunity. I just want to make a couple announcements before we get started. Any of our additional trainings coming up that might be of interest this month to you folks, I'd like to highlight. One is next Thursday, that would be the 25th of March. And that session is on the Rhode Island Green Building Compliance. So if anyone is interested in that, that will take place at noon. You can sign up on our website, similar to the way you did for this session. And also the following week at on the 31st at 10 a.m., it's a Wednesday, you'll be able to see this group in action again, or some of this group in action again, on a session called The Snowball Effect, How Municipal Energy Projects Can Unlock Savings. So I'd like to highlight those for you before we get started today. I'm really excited, as I said, to have this group with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Gill, who's going to get us started. Carrie.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie Gill. I'm Administrator of Grid Modernization and Systems Integration with the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources. We're thrilled that you all joined us today for this panel presentation all about microgrids for resilient municipalities. Throughout this presentation, we will talk about what microgrids are, why you may want one, and what resources are available, including an opportunity to inform a new program that's in development that can help support communities in installing microgrids for resiliency purposes. I'll also note that we've got a few panelists with us today. From the Office of Energy Resources, we have Jackie Oliveri and Shauna Beeland. They make up our renewable energy team. And from the US Department of Energy, we have Dan Ton. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The purpose of today's webinar is to give information and to ask for information. We're hoping that this will be a two-way exchange. We're going to give you a high-level overview of microgrids, their use cases, and the resiliency benefits. And we're hoping to hear from you about what more you want in order to support communities, including yourselves in your roles, as well as your partners within the community, both within the municipality, as well as potentially private partners, in order to consider microgrids as a resilience asset. Now, what's a microgrid? Dan's gonna talk a lot more about this in a second, but just to set the stage, a microgrid is defined as a group of interconnected loads and distributed energy resources that acts as a single controllable entity to provide backup power to critical infrastructure during electric grid outages. Now, let's just break that down. I'm assuming that we're starting from zero here. I want to make sure that we're bringing everyone along in this presentation. So when we say a group of interconnected loads, what we mean is a group of interconnected electrical loads. And that could be a building that's using electricity to run an HVAC system. It could be a home that's using electricity to support the residents inside. It could be a gas station that's using electricity to keep the lights on and to make sure that the gas pumps are still working. When we say distributed energy resources, what we're talking about are things like renewable energy, so rooftop solar or carports, as well as things like energy storage, for example, batteries. Now, a microgrid has those two components, and the key part is that they are interconnected and they can be controlled, meaning that if there happens to be a power outage on the grid, then the interconnected loads, the buildings and their distributed energy resources, the rooftop solar and the batteries, can all work together and provide backup power. I know that we have a number of municipal officials on this webinar. We also have a number of folks that represent distributed energy resource companies. We're hoping that we can speak to everyone on this webinar, and we're hoping to get information from everyone in order to understand how exactly to best design a program that can provide the most targeted, most impactful, and most helpful support for you all. Next slide, please. Now, I said that a few of us were from the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources. OER, for short, is the state's lead energy policy office. And our mission is to advance Rhode Island towards a clean, affordable, reliable, and equitable energy future. We see microgrids as one technology that can hit all of those buckets. And throughout this webinar, we'll be explaining why that is. Next slide. Now, this webinar will have two main pieces to it. The first piece is a presentation from Dan at the US Department of Energy on microgrids, and it will include a couple of case studies so that you can really get a feel for what microgrids are and what benefits they provide. We'll have an opportunity for questions following Dan's presentation. The second part will be talking about a request for information to help us design a microgrids program. Shauna will be walking through
This is Shauna. We might have lost Carrie, so I will keep us going through this agenda. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll be presenting on a microgrid request for information after the DOE presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A on the request for information itself. Next slide. All right, and with that, does anybody have any clarifying questions before we move on to Dan's presentation? Oh, I should just do a quick logistics. If you do have questions during the course of Dan's presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then we can address those questions at the end of his presentation. If you have a clarifying question, please also type that in the chat button, and then Jackie will help us facilitate those questions throughout the presentation in case you have a clarifying question about something, either an acronym or just a clarification of what Dan's speaking about, and then we'll leave the substantive questions towards the end. And with that, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Ton. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an introduction to microgrids. I'm with the Office of Electricity. Within the office, there's a division called Advanced Grid Research, and that's within the Department of Energy. Next slide, please. So Carrie talked a little bit about the microgrids. I'm going to just go through this quickly. So again, microgrid is a group of interconnected loads and distributed energy resources within the clearly defined electrical boundaries that act as a single controllable entities. And microgrid can operate both in grid connected or in islanded modes and switch between modes. And so in this definition, remote and islanded power systems are also considered microgrids. So if a system has described features but with no electric grid connected to, we call it remote microgrid. And so the picture shows different types of microgrids, from a single building microgrid to grid connected to a partial feeder or a full feeder or a substation. So on the right side here, you can see that, group of like a university or hospital systems, buildings can be considered as microgrids, as well as the larger systems that are, a whole feeder or substation. But if we have a single building, just like a home, with the solar system on the roof, basically, we don't consider it as a microgrid, just to clarify. Next slide, please. So I wanted to make a distinction between the regular or traditional microgrids versus the advanced microgrid concepts. So on the left side here, we have the basic features with we probably well known based on the past. These features including, microgrid have a group of distributed energy resources and load combined, either electrical or thermal. That group can be controlled by a single, as a single entity. So, a microgrid for the military base, for example, that can connect their, DER resources with their loads, and then it can disconnect from the grid when something happened, and provided the services when there's issues with the grid. But on the right side, I wanted to talk about the advanced features. The advanced features are the features that Department of Energy have been trying to develop and support in order for us to move more into, make it easier and cheaper and better for the future of the microgrids. And these features including the capability to automatically transition to and from and operate islanded well compatible with system protection devices and coordination. So the difference between this and the traditional feature is that, traditional features that normally microgrid are manually operated. So if something happened, operator would, take time to disconnect the microgrid, turn on the generators, connecting the loads based on the design, and then run it and provide the services. But in the advanced features, this can be done automatically with, electronic devices. And as you know, the protection system is different when you're connecting with the grid and, using the grid for your system protection. When you are disconnected from the grid, now, the power flow is different. You buying from the grid, and now some of the resources within the grid protected differently before, and now, have a reverse power flow. So the protection system has to be different. And that has to be thought out and has to be designed and operate. The other feature within advanced feature is that it can provide, it has the capability to manage both dispatchable and intermittent resources with or without integrated energy storage. As we all know, energy storage is more expensive, very expensive. And so with the advanced feature, there's a way to optimize, how we can minimize the energy storage versus doing, turn off loads and managing loads, chain between different resources and load. And that's a capability that provided by advanced feature microgrids. Also the advanced control and energy management system, and that's happening in an optimized way. So basically, microgrid in the past has been designed to provide reliability and resiliency without, having capability to work in parallel with the grid. So in the normal operational, we call it blue sky. It's really not a microgrid. You're buying from the grid, and then whether something happened, you just turn on the microgrid and provide resiliency and reliability. Now, the advanced control features allowing microgrid to operate in parallel with the grid during blue sky conditions. So basically, you can do improving economics that way. You can provide services back to the grid, providing capacity, things like that. And the last feature here is scalable. So, you can combine resources to make right-sized microgrid, or you can make it combine multiple microgrid to make a bigger microgrid, and it's interoperable. And so as we know, a lot of equipments are not really working well together, and it's big cost to make them work well together. And so interoperability is the advanced feature of the advanced microgrid, including also cybersecure architecture that allowing microgrid for networking with other microgrids within the substation or across different substations. It can integrate with the utility as well. A lot of microgrids we seeing today as much smaller in size, and so it's operating basically independent from the grid, because it really doesn't need to be coordinated with the grid. It doesn't really providing any services back to the grid, or either it's mostly on the transmission side. So, but the advanced feature will allow that to happen for the future. So imagine when you have a system or a microgrid that can provide power to the community when something happened, substation, school. But when you don't have any, it under blue sky, now you can use the solar resources or electric vehicle resources to sell back to the grid. Then, the grid economics for the grid is much better, and it's easier to implement such a system. Next slide, please. So in this, several commercial companies are tracking microgrid projects in the US and are producing quarterly or annually reports. The two pie charts are taken from published reports by DOE National Renewable Energy Laboratory based on microgrid projects tracked by Navigant Research and Green Tech Media, respectively. The two charts give good representation of microgrid market segments in the US. And the two industry databases are very significantly different, because Navigant database have twice as many remote microgrid projects as GTMs. And the work McKinsey report reportedly tracked over 3,000 operational microgrid in the US. And the bar chart on the right depict microgrid project completed annually. Note that majority of microgrid companies over the last decade is characterized as basic microgrid. So if you look at on the left side, you see microgrids have been binned by different applications. So community is one, remote application, campus or institutional, or commercial or industrial. So on the right side, the majority of the projects are basic or traditional microgrid. In 2019 or so, we see a big spike in the advanced microgrid development. But in 2020, there is a pause in the development because of the pandemic. Next slide, please. And so on this slide, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the value of a microgrid. Why do people, implement microgrids? Microgrid can provide a list of benefits shown on the left. And these benefits stream directly related to multiple objectives of microgrid owners and operators. Current and future microgrid projects are making strides toward maximizing the benefit stream for optimization of multiple objectives of microgrid owner and customers to lower market barriers for broad microgrid development. So on the left side, most of the microgrid that we have seen focusing on, supporting the resiliency or reliability. And we see, and then some of them are developed because for integration of distributed energy resources. So that's the majority of the benefit that we see with advanced features. Now, microgrid can be integrated to provide, to optimize multiple objectives at the same time. So like I had mentioned before, you know, in the blue sky condition, economics or environment is focused, right? So, but when something happens, whether it's a event that can happen every day, which relates to reliability, or something that are, you know, happening for a long, you know, it's not happening for a long time, like hurricane or earthquakes or something, that is resilience, or it can be man-made, which is related to security. And the advanced concept, advanced features that allow us to operate in multiple of these conditions with the in an optimized way. Next slide, please. So this table provide a breakdown of multiple value proposition of grid-connected and islanded microgrid. And in summary, microgrid can continue to provide power in islanded mode during grid outages caused by increasing challenging natural and man-made events, while under normal operating conditions, microgrid can deliver additional values and revenue streams to the customer and the grid. So on the picture here, it divide the value into two different bins. You know, the values for customers and value for grid services. And so under each of these categories, we have different conditions. So under blue sky and in black sky, right? And so, for an example, under the customer service benefits, in the blue sky, we have, you know, community solar programs to support decarbonization. In the islanded service, we provide resilience and other type of services. On the grid side, we see a lot of wholesale energy market participation, including, you know, wholesale ancillary services. Or now we can also see some distribution, especially the non-wire alternative. You know, instead of building bigger substation, we can use microgrid to lower the demand. And then the other type of islanding services for grid service, including providing resiliency for the grid and providing the you know, the grid forming, microgrid forming services. So in the future, we have, you know, multiple microgrid that can be networked together. That can be done, and providing black start to some, you know, buildings outside of the microgrid, that can be done as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of cost, graph was adapted data, from the phase 1 microgrid cost study reported by NREL, and NREL collected cost data from 81 microgrids and bin them into several categories, as shown in the caption below the graphs. And the graph shows that conventional and the conventional and renewable generation represent the largest percentage in most segments, with conventional generation accounted for about 76% in the campus institutional microgrid and 54% in the community segment. In the commercial, industrial, and utility microgrids, soft costs represent a significant portion 43% in the commercial industrial microgrid, and 24% in the utility microgrid. The soft costs include those costs that are associated with engineering, construction, commission, and regulation. The additional infrastructure categories involve distribution system infrastructure, information technology, communication upgrades, metering, etc. And lastly, energy storage contributes significantly to the total cost of commercial and community microgrids with percentages of 25% and 15% respectively. And the US Department of Energy has applied R&D programs addressing each of these categories. And we at the Office of Electricity are primarily addressing energy storage, control, soft costs, and additional infrastructure. Next slide, please. So in terms of the stages, we see, for the community, we start the process with planning and then move on to engineering design, development, and then operation. The feasibility study stage in the planning stage is to determine technical or economic feasibility of microgrid design options to meet microgrids requirements. The study should include estimates on the size of the system, such as load requirements, DER requirements, objectives, and then provide a cost-benefit analysis that consider multiple design options within a specified degree of accuracy. So if a community, start to think about microgrids, the feasibility study would, provide them with a big picture to see whether it's feasible, and if it's feasible, what are the sizes and what are the costs. It's also providing some options for the community to consider. So if you just wanted to protect 3 buildings in terms of 10 years event, then this is the size and cost and the benefits. But if you wanted to include 10 buildings, including gas stations or high school, for an example, then what's the size, what type of resources that needed, and how much it would cost. But also, it's importantly how much of the metrics, or how long can you provide the power to without interruption for the community, and so on. And so, based on the suites of tools for planning stage includes tools for both blue sky and black sky analysis. So we do, 2 of them separately. And then they are often used in combinations at the end because we found out that there's no single tool that truly can optimize the microgrid design for resiliency and efficiency and sustainability, and ensure that the design is physically feasible and realistic. So we have a suite of tools to do that. And after the feasibility study is complete, the development proceeds to preliminary design phase, which is called 30% system design. A deeper analysis will be performed during this phase by laying out the basic technology types, the size, the location, and methods of interconnecting the microgrid. So after the first quick look, then we now looking at how do we where are the wires that need to be connected to different buildings, and what are the it's more specific of the design need to be laying out in this phase. And going from 30% to 100% design required more detailed engineering design, including utility interconnection requirements. Following this stage will be build out and operations. So mostly after the preliminary design, the engineering firms and industries are the primary entities to carry out the ensuing stages. So Department of Energy is normally, helping in the feasibility study and sometime in the preliminary design phase, just for your information. Okay, so now I'm gonna transition into, next slide, please. So I'm gonna transition into a couple of case studies. The first one is the CERT's microgrid in Manhattan, and CERT is the consortium of electric reliability technology solutions. And so this consortium comprises of national laboratories and industry partners. The consortium developed a microgrid control technology capable of seamlessly transition between grid tied and island mode operation. This control technology has since been built into Tecogen's commercial combined heat and power system. So the Brevoort co-op is a 20-story building, and the building converted its oil-based heat to the natural gas CHP system as part of an energy efficiency green initiative in 2010. And during the week of the widespread utility outages left in the wake of Hurricane Sandy in the late 2012, the co-op microgrid system anchored by the 400 kilowatt CHP systems autonomously transition to island mode and continue to power the entire building, including central boilers, domestic power supply, power pumps, elevators, and all apartments. And during the period of normal operation, the microgrids operate in parallel with the Con Edison utilities. A detailed description of the microgrid system is documented in the peer-reviewed publication as cited on the slide here if you want to have more information. Next slide, please. For another case study, which is in Stafford Hill, Rutland, Vermont. In 2011, Hurricane Irene left 117,000. It's about 1/6 of the state population without power and resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars damages. We worked with the state of Vermont with technical support from Sandia National Laboratory and the Clean Energy State Alliance to complete the installation of a resilient microgrid with battery storage that can be islanded to provide emergency power to Red Cross Emergency Shelter at Rutland High School. The project has realized a year-round cost saving. When connected to the grid, the microgrid generates and stores power for Green Mountain Power, providing cost saving through annual and monthly peak demand management, energy arbitrage, and frequency regulation. The financial information, including payback period of 8 years, is shown on the slide, and also further details are available in the published case study report. So in this demonstration, the microgrid built in 2015 represents several firsts. The first solar power microgrid to operate to provide backup power to public emergency shelter. First microgrid developed on a brownfield site that was formerly the Rutland City landfill, the first large-scale project in the New England region to demonstrate how utilities in the ISO Northeast can use battery to significantly cut their costs. Next slide, please. And finally, feasibility study analysis with the Naval Station Norfolk. So now we segment and segue into a current project on integrated energy master planning with incorporation of resilience and microgrids for city or communities. And city-owned resilient problem, utility owns the infrastructure. So that's the dilemma. City has maintained that they want energy resilience investment, but they don't know how to work with their utility to get it done. We've also noticed that energy tool can reflect reliability value under normal conditions well, but not integrated with resilience valuation tools and methodology. So that means the resilient is a untapped benefit. This project is to validate a suite of tool and capability as mentioned in the previous slide for the microgrid planning stage for application in real decision-making context. The project is also implementing holistic energy planning approach to improving resiliency through consequence-focused microgrid system analysis and designed to demonstrate improved energy resilience for Naval Station Norfolk. And so on the figure top right, it depicts an energy master planning process is being adopted to support the microgrid feasibility study analysis to enhance energy resilience of Naval Station Norfolk, both inside the base and outside of the perimeter, working with the city of Norfolk, local utility, Dominion, and other infrastructure utilities such as water and Naval Station Norfolk. So the figure on the bottom is the right shows the central redevelopment of the project in Norfolk. And the project site is historically flood-prone rent-controlled neighborhood. And the redevelopment project is particularly supporting Naval Station Norfolk need. So as you know, with multiple community, and we see that resiliency is an afterthought, right? So you wanted to build a microgrid to do something, but it's not really a well thought out process to make sure that, you know, what is the resiliency goals that you want to achieve. So couple of points here. One is that, you know, resiliency is not just about electricity. It's also about communication, transportation, food, things like that. And the whole process need to be thought out. If you have power to gas station, but there's no, you know, communication, there's still, you know, lack of, you know, life as we know it. And so this project is allowing us to look at resiliency holistically, you know, from the beginning. You know, I wanted to protect this area. What type of event that we are likely to get? If that happens, you know, in this case is flood. What would be impacted, and how do we put, you know, provide support, providing services when something happened. In this case, we you know, working from both inside the base and outside the base, because, you know, if people inside the bay has power, but the people are, you know, the most of the people and their families are living outside, it's not really helping the whole situation. So resiliency have to, you know, think of it from the beginning and think of it in a way that is systematic. And we do, you know, looking into this and providing methodologies and integrating microgrid as part of that process. Next slide, please. Okay, so so we have worked with NARUC and NASIO to establish a microgrid state working group. And this state working group provides additional resources to the state level to enhance microgrid development. This working group is supported by the DOE microgrid program to provide venue for engagement with regulators and state energy programs. And in addition to holding needs assessment, workshops, technical webinar, and visit to microgrid sites. The working groups also develop briefing papers targeting decision makers at state regulatory and energy program offices. And 2 briefing papers have been published, and additional 2 papers are being developed and listed on the slide. And so the working group website has further information on its activity and all briefing papers and that are under development. So I hope this can be a resource to your state when you're considering and work through the microgrid implementation. With that, that concludes my presentation, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Dan, thanks so much for that amazing overview, and apologies for the technical difficulties earlier. What I heard, I just want to summarize some key points from that amazing presentation. Those key points are that a clean energy microgrid can support resilience and reliability by providing backup power. And it can be as simple as for a single building or a single service, or complex enough to include a grouping of buildings or an entire community. Now, when the microgrid is not providing backup power, it can also provide other functions. So that's during blue sky mode. Those functions can include having the renewable energy component of the microgrid reduce greenhouse gas emissions and support environmental and energy goals for communities. And the energy storage component of the microgrid can support additional revenue streams by providing grid services through program participation. That's all very wonderful. And it looks like, you know, we've seen that clean energy microgrids are becoming more prevalent across the country. And so we're looking at how we can bring those microgrids here. So let's pause for a second and take some questions. Jackie, could you please help facilitate the questions?
Yes, of course. So we have one question so far for you, Dan, from Kurt Spalding. He asked, with advanced features, can a microgrid help manage power peaks and avoid using dirty generation?
Can you repeat that question again? Sorry.
Yes. With advanced features, can a microgrid help manage power peaks and avoid using dirty generation?
Yes, that's one of the feature of the advanced controller is to be able to look at the environment. So let's say you have a hot day coming, and then basically, you know, advanced controller will be saying, okay, what kind of resources do we have? Do we have solar? Do we have access to different type of resources? So in terms of solar, they would be looking at the forecast of how much hours, how much of resources the solar can provide next day, right, tomorrow. And then it will make a decision, you know, how can we manage the availability of the solar during this time? So if we have a lot of solar, well, we can have more loads. But if we don't have a lot of solar, then maybe we shouldn't. We can turn off or dim the lights or some other AC system, you know, do things like that. And so by doing that, it's now allowing the owner operating the microgrids to lower the cost and also, not getting as much power from the dirty, fuel, whatever that area is using, whether it's coal or maybe natural gas or other sources or diesel. So yes.
Dan, that was a great point about the integration of building controls, demand side management, and energy efficiency as part of thinking about the microgrid as a whole. Rhode Island has some really great energy efficiency programs available, and we have someone on OER's staff who helps with municipal lead by example efforts. And so if anyone does have any questions about energy efficiency, please do reach out to us. But that's definitely one important pillar of thinking about a clean energy microgrid. We have some more time for questions for Dan. You can enter them into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak your question.
We have received another question, Dan, from Kevin Gallup of Charleston, Rhode Island EMA. He asked, after a blizzard or hurricane, how does the system protect the line repair workers? When an automatic microgrid kicks in, if the automatic sensors and or switches have probably been damaged too.
Yes. So, in the past, this is a good example of not integrating or coordination between the microgrid and the utility system. If we operate in an environment of that environment, the safety issue can arise, right? So because, linemen without knowledge where the live wire is going to be based on the microgrid, that can happen. But what we are hoping is that the integration or coordination between microgrids can and should happen in the future. And so this is not just the issue related to the microgrid, but it's issue about the integration and coordination with local utility.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions before we move on to the second half of today's workshop? Now, there will be additional time for questions at the end of the workshop. So if you have something that comes up during the next presentation, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll make sure to get to it before the workshop ends. So thanks, Dan, for your presentation. Now I'll shift gears and turn it over to Shauna Bieland, who is Administrator of Renewable Energy Programs for the Office of Energy Resources.
Thanks everyone for being here. I really appreciate your time that you're spending with us today. So I'm going to go over the request for information that our office issued about 3 weeks ago now, and we're looking forward to your responses to that request for information. But before I go into the details of that, I thought I'd provide some historical context for why we're asking what we're asking. So in 2018, OER published the Resilient Microgrid for Rhode Island Critical Services report. We partnered with Celtic Energy to issue this report. It took about a year to write this report. It's pretty lengthy. It's over 200 pages. But the report covers microgrids in great detail, including types of microgrids, the various technologies that can be used within a microgrid, how to determine critical loads that might be included in a project that you might be thinking about, as well as operational considerations. So a lot of what Dan talked about is included in this report. What also might be of interest to you is the cost-benefit analysis model tool that was developed to think through various financing and incentive options that might help support your microgrid from a financial perspective. And lastly, where I think many of us are right now is the report identifies why you might want to consider a microgrid, which, if you're at that very starting point, that's totally okay. And we hope that we can guide you through the process of thinking about a microgrid for your municipality. Next slide, please. So Rhode Island EMA has identified 16 sectors that are considered critical infrastructure. Many of you are familiar with this list, but I just thought I'd run through it real quick. So energy, and specifically resiliency, is critically important, and energy is considered a lifeline sector by EMA. And so these systems need to stay operational when the grid is down. So as you've heard today, a microgrid can help provide electricity when the grid is down. There are so many examples as to why this is important. Lessons learned from Hurricane Sandy, like the example that Dan gave. One other example from Hurricane Sandy is having elevators in high-rise buildings stopped functionality during the storm because the electrical boxes running those elevators were underwater. And so folks couldn't get down, especially some of the seniors that were stuck in their buildings and they couldn't evacuate. So an example like that caused building owners to rethink where that infrastructure should be in buildings that are prone to flooding. And so that's a great example of infrastructure that a microgrid wouldn't be able to support because the elevator infrastructure was underwater. So a microgrid wouldn't have been able to help with that process. But that's the type of thinking is a part of this starting process for what types of infrastructure and loads that you might want to include in a microgrid. Other most recent examples include lessons learned from Texas and the challenges there with the lack of insulation of electrical infrastructure. Next slide, please. Okay. So in 2020, our office identified funding through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative to support a microgrid program. And we'll be partnering with the Renewable Energy Fund to deploy this program. As part of our work designing this program, we decided to solicit input from Rhode Island cities and towns directly, consultants, if you're working with a consultant, or others that would potentially apply for this funding. Your feedback is critically important because we didn't want to do a top-down program design where we would just issue an RFP or an RFQ for feasibility or construction without a detailed understanding of what you might need. We heard today from Dan that there's multiple things to consider when designing a microgrid. And so there are some things that we might not have thought of in our program design. So we want to hear directly from you. A few weeks ago, we published the request for information, and that's available on our website. Your answers to these questions will directly inform program design and identify what types of funding need to be prioritized with our limited funds. All right, next slide.
We had received a quick question from the previous slide. Do emergency shelters fall under emergency services?
I am just about to get to that. Okay. But the quick answer is yes. So there are three major components that we're seeking feedback on. These include what types of microgrids should be allowed to participate in the program, the eligibility criteria for applying to the program, and overall general program design questions. So I mentioned that it's published on our homepage, and conveniently, we have a Word document published with all 16 questions, which hopefully will make responding to the request for information a little bit easier. So you can just answer the questions in the Word document and then send it back to us. You can send the response to Jackie's contact information that's here on the slide. Next slide. Okay, so I won't go into detail about all 16 questions in the RFI because obviously you can read it and consider responding, but I wanted to highlight a few things that we're seeking feedback on. And there's two critical definitions that we're looking for your feedback on. The first is a component of program design that includes the microgrid requiring a component for a public benefit. So we're looking for feedback on the definition of a public benefit in the request for information. So we've defined that as a public benefit is an identifiable benefit that can be assessed by members of the public, accessed by members of the public. Some examples include a school that serves as a shelter during a disaster, a municipal complex with a 911 center that needs to stay operational during a power outage, or a senior center that can keep refrigerators on for medication and other services such as Wi-Fi access or phone charging. So we're looking for feedback on the public benefit definition. Another critical piece of the program design is the definition of critical infrastructure. And so we hope to get your input on our proposed definition, which is how EMA defines it. And the slide earlier talked about the 16 sectors, but EMA has additionally defined critical infrastructure as critical infrastructure includes those assets, systems, networks, and functions, physical or virtual, so vital to Rhode Island that their incapacitation or destruction would have a debilitating impact on security, economic security, public health, or safety, or any combination of those matters. And so we're also looking for your feedback on that definition to include in our program design as what we would allow for a microgrid to participate. So the microgrid project that you would propose would need to meet that definition as one component of the microgrid would meet the critical infrastructure definition. Next slide. Okay. So we also have excuse me, we also have some questions about what type of applicants can apply to the program. So there's 3 eligibility criteria that we're considering, and that's 1, 2, and 3 listed here. But I wanted to highlight the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank's Municipal Resiliency Program. We would encourage any participants or any applicants to our program would have considered or be part of RIB's Municipal Resiliency Program, and that's why it's number 1 here. One of the reasons for that is participation in that program really gets municipalities thinking about what their needs are related to resiliency. And so if any of you have gone through that process with RIB, you know what I mean, but it's an important thing to think about because we would like to make sure that municipalities are thinking about resiliency holistically, and then from that decision-making process, think about a microgrid project. So that's the applicant, that's part B, that's the applicant eligibility criteria that we're seeking feedback on. Next slide. Okay. And then the third piece in section C is seeking comments on overall program design. So what information do you need to support a microgrid from concept through construction, all the way to operation and maintenance of the system? So we've heard from Dan today that there are multiple development stages for a microgrid project. He highlighted planning, engineering, design, construction, and operation. And so we're seeking feedback on what you might need for each one of those stages in this request for information. Some of those processes are more expensive than others. So would you need funding support for one of those 4, all of those 4? And so that's what we're looking for in this section. Next slide. So here are the instructions for responding to our request for information. We'll post this recording, the slides that we've presented today, and the links referenced throughout this presentation on the Office of Energy Resources microgrid website. We'll also link to the NARUC and NASIO microgrid working group that Dan alluded to earlier. Rhode Island is a part of that working group, and so there are quite a few resources that have been developed, and some of those links that Dan mentioned will include in our resources section, as well as some other information that we might think is important to you folks. Next slide. And with that, that takes us through the request for information section, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks so much, Shauna. I dropped in the link to where the request for information can be found, as well as the microgrids report that Shauna discussed. That's in the chat, and Jackie has provided her email address. Again, that's the email address that you would send any questions to for the RFI, as well as responses to the RFI. Again, we invite folks to either write in questions to the chat or just feel free to unmute yourselves and speak up. We're happy to have this be a initial discussion of what you're thinking about, or we're happy to answer questions about the RFI, our report, or anything else that you have that you're curious about for microgrids.
If you have any questions that you think of later, feel free to email those to Jackie and we'll collectively respond to those as well.
I think, Jackie, if you could put up the next slide too. Yeah, perfect. So again, you have Jackie's email address in the chat, but feel free to contact any of us at any point with questions about literally anything, microgrids or not, we're here to help. And so if we can connect you to resources or answer your questions or help provide support, you know, we're always more than happy to chat with anyone on a one-on-one basis. It looks like we do have a question in the chat. And the question is a ground source heat pump utility eligible? That is a fantastic question. Shauna, I don't know if you have initial thoughts about this, but maybe that's something that we would encourage folks to respond with in the RFI, if that's something that you all would be interested in exploring.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question to include in a response. Obviously, ground source heat pumps are an eligible technology under the renewable energy standards. So that's something that we could support, although currently there aren't any incentive programs to support that technology specifically. So that's something that we would need to do a little bit more homework on to make sure that we could provide the technical support that you might need for thinking about a ground source heat pump. We just don't have that expertise internally, but we'd be happy to explore with our partners some other resources that we could provide for you.
We're happy to hang around for a few more minutes in case folks do have questions. I know at the beginning, Jennifer mentioned 2 other webinars that were coming up. Those might be helpful webinars too, in order to continue to explore some of these concepts and see how everything works together. So, you know, Jennifer, if you'd like to re-mention those webinars before we end. And team, Shauna, Jackie, and Dan, if you all have any other comments or anything else that you'd like to say, please feel free.
Well, happy to let you, oops, there's my camera. Happy to let you know again, for the folks who didn't hear me the first time, that we have 2 other webinars coming up this month on energy related and environmental related topics. Next Thursday, the 25th, we have a session at noon on the Rhode Island Green Building Act and how to address compliance issues with that. So that, as well as our other session, you can just sign up on our website the same way you did for this session. And the following week at 10 a.m. on the 31st, which is another Wednesday, we have some of the folks back from OER here, and their session is entitled The Snowball Effect and How Municipal Energy Projects Can Unlock Savings. So we probably don't have a bunch of finance folks here today. We might have a few, but I would encourage municipalities to get in touch with your finance directors or team to also look at ways that you could come together on those issues, and it'd be a great chance to start that conversation with the session that's on the 31st.
Thanks so much, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, if there are no other questions, then I think that we can conclude this webinar. We thank you all so much for joining us, and our sincere thanks also goes to Dan from the U.S. Department of Energy and Jennifer from the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns for helping and participating and giving us this platform to talk about clean energy microgrids. Of course, we thank all the participants in advance for sending us your questions and your responses to the RFI. With that, I think that we will conclude today. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.